Navy SEAL's Innocent Italian by Leslie North. The Denver Men Series, Book 4. Chapter 1. Grazie. I can't tell you how excited I am to finally be in America. Alexandra Moretti gave the waitress her order and handed back her menu. Risole's was a charming Italian restaurant with strong ties to her beloved Verona right in the heart of New York City. Looking around the beautifully decorated restaurant, she tried not to notice that the waitress was paying more attention to the lunch guests sitting around the corner than she was to herself and Il Signor Bresi. Alex resisted the urge to turn around and look at the man who held the young woman's attention. Marco Bresi smiled at her. "Keep that enthusiasm. Your papa asked for additional assistance at our last meeting. He didn't say anything to you?" Alex cringed inside. Knowing what he was about to say didn't make it any more palatable. She shook her head, waiting to hear her future decided for her yet again. He gave her a sympathetic look. "Your papa asked that I help find a suitable husband for you. He was adamant about it being a father's responsibility. He had me promise to do what I could for you." She sipped at her water and offered a one-shoulder shrug. "I do want to get married, eventually. But Papa, he is stuck on this idea since my former betrothed and I parted. There is no need for you to be a matchmaker on my account." With a smile, Bresi covered her hand. "It is no bother." The unmistakable sadness in his voice gave her pause. Their food arrived. It was good, but not as good as back home. Or perhaps it was her father's plans that dulled her enjoyment of the food. She tried to concentrate as Il Signor Bresi spoke of sights to see and of his business plans. He paused to look at a text message and frowned. Giving him a covert look, she saw his hand tighten on his phone as if he might crush it, but then he set his phone back down. While she wasn't privy to his business dealings, her father had hinted that he'd been having some difficulties recently. Alex made a quick decision. "After we eat, I think I will walk a bit to see the city. Do you mind?" Bresi shook his head. "I will leave the driver with you. Use him as you like." He paid for lunch, and Alex knew better than to argue. She would simply do what she always did. She would do as she wished. Outside, she headed first to Mount Sinai Children's to meet with the director. As she had feared, the place seemed too sterile. Oh, it was a good hospital, no doubt, and she was happy to meet a few of the children, but she shuddered to think of working here, among the smells of antiseptic and the hard surfaces that would make her music sound no better than if it came from a CD. She would have to think more on how to adapt her work to this kind of place. For now, she wanted to move on. Outside the hospital, she tugged her coat tighter. The driver got out and held the door for her, but she shook her head. "Please, I will walk. You will meet me?" The driver touched a hand to his cap. "Yes, ma'am. You have my number. When you're ready to be picked up, just give me a call and I'll come wherever you are." Alex beamed at him. "Grazie. I will call." She gave him a little wave and headed down the street, her heels clicking on the pavement. The city was amazing. Everyone seemed in such a hurry. And the buildings, she had seen photographs and movies, of course, but it was different to be in these canyons of skyscrapers that left the streets cold and shadowed. Every corner seemed to have a cart selling something. Pizza, hot dogs, roasted nuts, falafel. She pulled in a deep breath. The air smelled of cars, of food from the carts, and a little bit of something not good, though she couldn't see much refuse on the streets. Most people seemed to be dressed for business. A few, like her, gawked at the tall buildings, and some seemed shabby and unkempt. She felt sorry for anyone without money, and she dug into her purse to give out a few dollars when she could. Tucking her hands into her pockets, she strolled the streets, admiring the store windows, watching others dash down the streets, usually talking on a cell phone or texting. With a shiver, she turned up the collar of her coat. At a street corner, she stopped near a coffee shop and thought of going in to warm herself. Perhaps Il Signore Bresi had been right. She should have taken the car and seen the city in more comfort. She wrinkled her nose and muttered, "But what fun is that?" From behind her, a deep voice asked, "Excuse me, did you say something?" Chapter 2. She turned fast, and Jake saw the impending disaster. Her heel caught on the grating of a subway vent, and she started to topple over. He stepped forward, grabbing her by her upper arms and hauling her toward him. He kept hold of her while she got her feet under her again. Pushing away from him, she offered a small smile. Grazie. I didn't even see you there. She glanced around and caught her breath on a small gasp. Have we met before? He shook his head. Sorry, didn't mean to startle you. You were talking to yourself? Jake felt the shiver run through her body and an answering tingle ran down his spine. Her cheeks seemed to redden, but that could have been the cold. See, a bad habit, I am afraid. Alex moved backward a step, and Jake dropped his hands to his sides. Long as you don't start having both sides of the conversation, I think you're good. Alex grinned. I have heard that before. Head tipped to the side, she asked, Are you sure we have not met before? Jake held out his hand. Oh, I'd remember meeting you. Jake Travers. I think you'll find New York tends to shove the same people at you over and over. Alex shook his hand. Alexandra Moretti. But please, everyone calls me Alex. Alex, you're not from around here, are you? Jake gave her a smile. Italy, right? Florence? Can I buy you a coffee? He paused, his smile growing broader. I apologize. I'm throwing all these questions at you and not giving you a chance to answer. Anyway, I'm dying to get out of this wind that's picking up. Join me? I do not mind many questions. Italy, yes, not far from Florence. And yes to the coffee. I too am dying a little. He held the door for her. The blast of warm air hit them and Jake pulled off his gloves and hat. Alex turned and smiled at him. Now I know why you look familiar. You ate at the same restaurant as I. Have you been following me? The question came out playful, and Jake could only stare at her. He hadn't thought she'd make him so fast, but they'd had the same waitress, and even Jake had noticed that she was far more attentive to him than any of her other tables. He offered up what he hoped was a charming enough grin. He paid for their coffees. The shop was part of a chain and went in for deep leather chairs, small tables, and a soundtrack of soft jazz. It was warm enough that Alex shed her coat, and Jake couldn't resist another look at her. She was the whole package, curves in the right places, and a face that had a few heads turning. Her straight nose only seemed to accentuate her full lips. He let his eyes skim over her figure, down the long line of her neck and the swell of her breasts under her V-neck sweater. She wore a small gold cross that sat nestled in her cleavage, and he knew he'd have to fight hard to keep from staring at it, wishing he could trace his finger down its length. He'd stayed on Bresi until the man went back to Diamante Global, and then nothing. A big zip. Marco Bresi was staying put as far as Jake could tell, and he knew the girl was headed to Mount Sinai. He was taking a risk, a couple of them actually, first by not staying on the target, and then by making contact with her. But he was playing a hunch that said he'd be able to get a lot closer to Bresi through this girl. He'd caught up with her as she was coming out of the hospital. Did she have a sick kid? He didn't think so. From the sound of it, she was scouting places for something. As soon as he had her seated, he asked, So what brings you to the Big Apple? She shook her head. Why you call this city an apple, I don't know. But I am here to meet with different people to discuss my work with musical therapy. I work with children to help reach them through music. Alex's eyes lit up as she spoke. For a second, Jake forgot the mission, forgot everything. Those eyes of hers could make a man forget his own name. Pulling himself back to the moment, he reminded himself that this was a job. She was a means to keep tabs on Marco Bresi, and that was all. He smiled and nodded. Musical therapy. Sounds like something kids would like. More than just like. I've seen amazing results, and now several hospitals and organizations here in your country. They write me to see my work personally. She wrinkled her nose. I really do not think I would like to work in a hospital, and so I am looking for a better, what you call, environment? So they could feel the vibrations of the music. See, the vibrations. The piano is also enjoyable for children, and they will get excited when they realize that they too can make music. It is amazing to see some of their transformations. I have seen children who were nonverbal attempt to make sounds to sing along with the music. Jake watched her expressive face as she talked. She was obviously passionate about what she did. He wondered if that passion was ever directed at other things. Pushing away that thought, he asked, "How long are you in New York?" "I go to Colorado in a few days' time." "Colorado? Seriously? What a coincidence," Jake murmured while watching her to see if she would take the bait. She did. "Really? How so?" Alex asked, cocking her head to the side and smiling. "I just agreed to work with a buddy of mine who lives in Denver. I'm heading to Colorado by the end of the week." Alex smiled. "It must be fate. But this Denver, is it not a big city?" "Smaller than the Big Apple." She leaned closer and he caught a hint of her perfume, something that smelled like peaches. She was gazing at him, a half smile curving her mouth. "So what work do you do, Mr. Travers?" "Jake, please. It's not that interesting. Just how long have you been in the States?" He wondered if she would tell him the truth. He was pleasantly surprised when she was completely honest. "We just arrived." "We?" Jake sipped his coffee. The beans tasted burned, but it'd do. "See, my father, he was unable to escort me. He is of an age when he hates to travel. He asked a business associate he has known for many years, Il Signor Bresi, to travel with me and smooth my way. He has been very helpful." Jake lifted his eyebrows. She gave a laugh. No, do not look like that. Il Signor Bresi is not what you Americans would call my sugar daddy. My papa is old-fashioned and wanted to make sure someone was looking out for me while I settled. I'm 25, but he still treats me as if I was 10. Jake offered up mock surprise. "What, you're not already happily married at the ancient age of 25? Sipping her cappuccino, he lifted a hand. "I'm thinking about making some changes. Might be nice to come home each night to the same woman and some kids." Jake heard the words leave his mouth, a little shocked to realize that he was telling the truth. The last 2 months had changed his perspective on life. He'd been waking up in the mornings, wondering if there was more and hoping there had to be. A ring sounded from Alex's purse. She pulled a face and offered an apologetic smile. Digging out her cell phone, she answered, "Prego?" Jake heard Marco Bresi's voice come over the line. "Alex, the driver said you left him to walk around the city. That is not a good idea. There is crime, and you do not know this city. I will have him come pick you up and he can take you wherever you wish to go, yes?" Alex huffed out a breath and turned away slightly. "Thank you, I appreciate the offer. But I find this city is much the same as London or Paris. Confusing until you walk the streets and get to know it. But I know how to take care of myself. Besides, I met a new friend and we're having coffee even now. I am safe enough." "Does this friend happen to be male?" Bresi asked, his voice a low growl. "See, but before you ask, no, there is no need for you or your driver to come to the rescue of me. I'm a big girl, remember?" Jake rubbed a hand over his mouth. That was just the problem. Alex was big enough to attract more than a little interest. He could almost feel sorry for Marco Bresi for having to look after her, if he didn't know the guy was slime. "I promised your papa, and we already discussed that. Besides, how are you to ever make good on the promise my papa extracted from you if this very thing does not occur?" Jake frowned. What had Bresi promised Alex's father? He heard a huffed breath from Bresi, as if the man had run out of patience. "If you intend to see this gentleman again, you will do me the favor of inviting him to dinner this evening. I will meet you at 7 in front of the office. My driver will take us to dinner and then return us afterwards." Now Alex frowned. Jake sipped his cappuccino. What, she didn't like being ordered around? But she said, "That is acceptable." She picked up her... Putting down her phone, Alex grimaced. "Your pardon, Jake. Il Signor Bresi is so much like Papa. Very demanding and trying to be a stern authoritarian. I've been commanded to invite you to dinner this evening, if you wish to join us. I cannot promise Il Signor Bresi will not inflict 1,000 questions on you. Was that your guardian on your tour of the States? Alex nodded. Si, and he wishes the chance to meet you. Jake looked at her. Leaning across the table, he put a hand over hers. What about what you wish? He watched the emotions move across her face. Uncertainty, a touch of irritation around those wide lips, a spark of something mischievous in her eyes. She pushed back her shoulders. I would like a chance to get to know you better. Chapter 3. Alex had heard from friends that American women didn't always wait for the man to make the first move. She was 25, independent, and knew what she liked and didn't like in a man. Why shouldn't she be a little more aggressive and go after a man who interested her? She'd tried her father's idea of a good relationship, and that hadn't ended so well. She found herself comparing the man sitting across from her with Riccardo Palmisano. The two men shared a similar look, a touch rugged, handsome. Both were charming, and that was something she had learned to distrust. The son of a neighboring vineyard owner in Verona, Riccardo had been selected as her future husband years ago, when they were still children. Their parents had even signed contractual agreements, and she had grown up knowing her future was already set, and she had been happy enough with the situation. The arranged marriage had been simply a part of life. She had become friends with Riccardo, but he had never seemed interested in her music. She had thought him a sweet person, kind and giving, and then he'd turned out to be the opposite. She hadn't discovered this until she had been scheduled to attend a 2-day workshop with a master cellist in Rome. That had not fit Riccardo's plans. He had sulked at first, and when she did not agree to change her plans, he had become angry and threatened to have her instruments destroyed. He had gone on a tirade, and Alex had seen the true Riccardo. Her father had been in the next room and had heard the yelling and the tears. He had burst in, had Riccardo thrown out, and torn up the contract. A phone call to Riccardo's father had ended the engagement and any further contact between the families. For the first time, Alex had found herself single and able to determine her own future. She had been 18 at the time and remembered feeling as if a huge burden had been lifted from her shoulders. She'd dated and had enjoyed her life, and she had thought her father had had enough of arranged matches, but he had spent the past 7 years trying to introduce Alex to nice young men. She'd found her own fun, her own way, but now Papa had asked Marco to help find her a husband. Her papa seemed too set in his ways, and he wanted grandbabies. Alex wanted a family.
He smiled. It's a saying, a penny for your thoughts. You just drifted a long way away. What were you thinking so hard about? Deciding to take a chance and practice her new, bold persona, she took a quick breath and asked, Would you like to spend the afternoon with me? Jake raised his eyebrows. That's unexpected. And I don't have other plans. I'd love to, but I have one request. See? Alex asked, her heart racing as she realized he'd be spending the day with her. You have to let me show you the New York I know. I grew up here. It's changed, but when you're a local boy, you know all the best spots. I thought you were like me and just visiting, Alex said, excitement bubbling up inside her. Jake shook his head. Nope. I've been in town arranging for my things to be taken from storage and sent to Colorado. Come on, let me show you around. I think I would like that. She stood to pull on her coat, but he beat her to it and held it open for her to slide her arms into the sleeves. When she turned around, he pulled the flaps closed and belted it for her. Standing this close to him, she froze, watching his hands tug the belt in place. Ready? His voice was a soft murmur, as if he too was afraid to break the spell that was happening between them. Giving him a nod, they left their cups on the table, and he took her hand in his and walked her out the door.
He led her across the street and down a few blocks, coming to a stop in front of a huge black motorcycle. Her heart skipped a beat. She stared at the bike in awe. She had secretly always wanted to ride a motorcycle, but Ricardo would have never been so daring, and her father would have died from a heart attack had she asked for her own. "You ever ride before?" Jake asked. She shook her head. She ran a hand over the seat of the bike. "I've always wanted to, but—" "Let me guess. It wasn't allowed? Papa and your mom worried for you?" Her eyes darkened with a touch of sadness. She shook her head. "Mama died long ago, and Papa is a little too protective of me. At times, I love him for it, but other times—"
For a moment, he looked down at her. She thought he would put his arms around her and pull her against him to taste her lips. She didn't know if she wanted that or not. He was handsome, more so than any other man she had dated, but she hardly knew him, and that was perhaps part of the excitement. Her breathing quickened, as did her pulse. With a nod, he turned and pulled 2 helmets from the back storage compartment. Handing one to her, he reached up and plucked her sunglasses off her face. Folding them, he dropped them into her purse and said, "Put this on." Wetting her lips, she did as he asked. He threw a leg over to straddle the bike and then held it steady while she climbed on behind him. She wrapped her arms around his middle, bringing her breasts into full contact with his back. She could feel his heat through his coat and his shirt. She closed her eyes and prayed for self-control. She heard him take a deep breath, and then his voice came through the helmet. "Everything good?" With a laugh, Alex tightened her hold on him. "Good, see. Where do you take me first?" "Where every tourist needs to start. The Statue of Liberty." He kicked the bike into gear and pulled onto the street. Alex clung to him, smelling the leather on him and a touch of something very male. She pressed herself closer. This most definitely was going to be an afternoon of adventure. Chapter 4. Did you bring the information from Travers? Trent Caldwell didn't bother with hellos as he held open the door to his house. Sean Marshall stood in the doorway, shifting uncomfortably from one booted foot to the other. With his shaggy blonde hair, jeans, and plaid shirt, Sean looked more like a construction worker than one of the best in security that Denver had to offer. He gave Trent a nod. "I did. I also noticed you've been busy. It wasn't enough to send both the IRS and the Agenzia delle Entrate after Bresi." Trent offered a tight smile. "Business negotiations can take months, and my attempt to win the contract with Michelangelo Velarde of Velarde and Vittorio Enterprises fell through, so I used cash, and a lot of it to hurry things up." Sean shook his head, but he stepped inside. "Yeah, meaning your goal is to keep Marco Bresi from having any success with his takeover offers. You're going to financially kneecap the guy." With a shrug, Trent led the way to his office at the back of his house. He'd been spending more time working from home lately. He wasn't getting too far from his wife, Brianna, or their daughter, Faith. It wasn't that long ago that Marco Bresi had kidnapped his baby. If it wasn't for Seth and Chelsea, he might have succeeded in bringing her to Italy. "Did you think I wouldn't use everything in my power to make him pay for harming my family?" Trent sat down behind his desk. He'd left off his tie. Faith liked to pull on it. But he'd put on a light blue button-down shirt, chino trousers, and polished loafers. No reason to look like a slob, even if he was working from home. Sean sat in the chair opposite Trent's. The office was painted a neutral color with bookcases, an oak desk, and oak floors. Brianna had added her own personal touch with a colorful rug and pictures taken from the area around their Aspen home. It was homey, which he was loath to say that he liked. Sean was looking like the leather armchair he'd sat in had a hot seat. He frowned and asked, "Trent, have you tried talking to the guy? I've got to say it, I'm not liking this side of you. You're coming across as being just as ruthless as that jerk and out to do as much damage, maybe more." What happens if— Trent turned to see his wife standing in the doorway. She looked tired. Faith had started teething early and kept her up as she tried to soothe their little girl. He tried to help, offering to stay up and rock Faith so she could go back to bed, but Brianna had insisted that he get some sleep instead. The kidnapping of baby Faith had left Brianna a restless and light sleeper, so even when he did try to help out, she was up anyway. She held Faith, a sleeping, blanketed bundle, in her arms. Trent stood and came around his desk to kiss her on the forehead before saying, "You're supposed to be sleeping." I heard the front door. "Didn't mean to disturb you, Bree." Sean offered up a nod and a rueful smile. Brianna waved him off and turned her attention back to Trent. "What collateral?" Trent pressed his lips tight. He'd promised he'd never lie to her, but he didn't want to start up an argument. She knew that he'd been orchestrating deals behind Bresi's back, including his communications with the IRS and their Italian counterpart. But if she had even the slightest idea what he was currently up to, she'd want him to stop, and he wasn't prepared to do that. At least not yet. He forced a smile. "Nothing you need to worry about." Chin lifting, she stared at him. "What have you done now?" Trent was amazed that she could see right through him. No one had ever been able to read him like her. In this particular instance, he wasn't liking it at all. He touched a finger to Faith's plump, pink cheek. "Why don't you take her back to her room? Sean and I will be finished here in a few minutes, and I'll join you." Brianna shook her head. She turned her sharp eyes onto Sean. "What's going on?" He held up his hands. "Don't put me in the middle." She shook her head. "It's Marco, isn't it? Trent, haven't you done enough already? I told you that I wanted all this behind us, so if that is not the case, then I most certainly do need to concern myself about it." Jaw tight, Trent tried to think of a way out of this. The only one he could see was straight ahead. "Brianna, the man has had 3 years to get over his daughter's death. When he made it known that he wanted nothing to do with me, I left him alone in his grief. But then he started coming after me. He attacked my company first, along with my reputation. And when he didn't succeed in ruining me there, he went after you." Trent stopped and took a shuddering breath. "Then he took Faith. Bresi proved that there is nothing he won't do to get what he wants. And I have now turned that exact same sentiment on him. Because there is nothing I won't do to ensure the safety of my family." Brianna patted Faith's back. "I understand that, and believe me, your overprotectiveness is one of many things that I love about you. What I don't understand is why Marco still insists on blaming you for everything that happened to Serena." Trent glanced at Sean and back to Brianna. They all knew that Serena had orchestrated her suicide to make it look like Trent had driven her to it, but he'd never really talked about how he felt about what happened. It had been bad enough that she'd been cheating on him for as long as she had, but he still hated to think badly of her. She was dead and buried. He'd wanted to leave her that way. It seemed that Bresi wanted to keep her memory alive at all costs, and that included dredging up some unpleasant memories for Trent. Sighing, he walked over to the couch in his office and thumped down. "Have a seat." Brianna sat, Faith still in her arms. Sean shifted, glanced at the doorway like he wanted to bolt, but Trent pinned a look on him. The guy was going to stay. Sean grudgingly sat back in his chair. Turning to Brianna, Trent chose his words carefully. "Serena was 19 when I met her. Beautiful, wealthy, spoiled, with an eye on becoming one of the world's top runway models. I think we were both using each other to a degree. I won't deny that. Her father had her on a generous allowance, but it was never enough for her. She enjoyed being spoiled, and I've long suspected that she was more interested in my money and the doors I could open for her than she was in me. Not that her father couldn't open." Trent shook his head, and Brianna reached out to put her hand on his thigh. He looked over at her and smiled before kissing her forehead. "I just negotiated a large deal that meant I wouldn't have time to take her to all the places she wanted to go, and she was unhappy about it. We were supposed to attend the Met Gala, and at the last minute I had to cancel. I told her to go anyway. She was angry with me and we argued, but I really couldn't get away." He barely remembered the argument. He'd been so wrapped up in work that he was willing to say anything to get her to stop pushing him. She ended up going without me. She met someone at the gala, and the next thing I knew, she'd gotten her first big contract with a fashion house in Milan.
I was excited for her dreams to finally come true, but I knew it was going to be a strain on us. We'd only been together a few months. I had too many deals in the works. I had to stay here while she went to Europe. The distance was more than hard, and it got even harder when she was always in a hurry to be somewhere. I started to worry about the crowd she was running with, and Marco even called me at one point, telling me she wasn't listening to him anymore. He thought I could do something. Trent sighed and scrubbed a hand across his face. Would they be here now if Marco hadn't gotten wind of her antics and put the responsibility on him? Or if Trent had actually had more influence over Serena? He cleared his throat. A few days after, I cleared my schedule and flew to Milan to surprise her. Trent shook his head, once again feeling the bitterness rise to his mouth. I was going to convince her to come back with me. I had pulled some strings in New York to get her an offer to sign with a major agency there. It was all one big surprise. Then she answered the door wearing not much of anything except some Eurotrash guy on her back. She'd been sleeping with someone else, Sean stated. Trent was aware they knew this part of the story, but it felt good to get it out. Trent rubbed his palm down his thigh. It turned out that he wasn't the first, but it seems I was the last to notice. Or second to last, I guess, if you count her father, who still refuses to believe there was anyone else. Man, that's tough. Sean shook his head. You did good not killing the guy she was sleeping with. I told her it was over, went back to the airport, and flew home. She called, left messages, but I wasn't interested in anything she had to say. Every message was a different story, a different excuse, and I have no idea if she was simply trying to get my attention or hoping one of her answers would appeal to me and I would take her back. You ignored her? Brianna asked, her forehead tight. Why didn't she just get on a plane and follow you? Leaning forward, Trent braced his elbows on his thighs. That was Serena. Marco spoiled her. The world came to her, not the other way around. She was successful and becoming sought after. She had money of her own, and she was spending it fast, from what I heard later. I took one call from her. I answered the phone without looking at the caller ID. Worst mistake of my life. She told me she was pregnant. Brianna stiffened. And she said the baby was yours? Trent nodded, the anger still tight in his stomach over the lies, the manipulations. She thought I was stupid enough not to add up the dates. There was no way the baby could be mine. I told her she'd gotten herself into this situation so she could find her own way out of it. I told her she should run home to Daddy. We argued and things got ugly. That night she drove off a bridge. I'm still not sure if she meant to kill herself. The police found drugs in her system and she'd been drinking. But Marco said she'd left him a note saying I'd refused to marry her after getting her pregnant, and he put the blame for all of it on me. Wow, Sean said, his voice a low mutter. I'd sort of known this story, but hearing the full scope of it from you now, it all sounds like one big manipulation. Tears shimmered in Brianna's eyes. I feel bad for Marco that he had to lose his daughter and grandchild like that. It sort of makes sense why he's lashing out. Rubbing his palms on his thighs, again. Trent nodded. But he's operating under the wrong set of facts. When she died, I hadn't had sex with Serena in more than 7 months. I'd managed to get to Milan to spend time with her once, way before the pregnancy. And then between my work and her excuses, we'd talked on the phone when we could get our schedules to line up. But even that was sporadic. Sean nodded. But Marco didn't believe you. Maybe Serena set up the whole thing to get back at both you and Daddy. She might have been going for an accident and a lot of sympathy. It doesn't sound like she was taking care of herself or her baby with the drugs and alcohol in her system. Shifting, the leather squeaking under her, Brianna turned to Trent. You still haven't told me what you're going to do. Ruin him financially, Sean offered. Trent frowned at him, but Brianna asked, Trent, how will that solve anything? He stood and walked over to his desk. If I cause enough havoc in his businesses, he'll have to spend his energy putting them back together. He won't have time for anything else, meaning we won't have any more trouble from him. When I pulled strings to get him noticed by the IRS, I'll admit that was me being angry and petty. But since Serena's death, Bresi has gone out of his way to be a thorn in my side. I put up with it when it was just about business, but now that he's put people I love in harm's way, I've had enough." She shook her head. "When I met him, he seemed so charming. It's hard to accept he's the same man who had Faith kidnapped." Brianna looked down at their daughter, who, thankfully, was fast asleep. Trent wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "Bracey's behavior has grown increasingly erratic over the last couple years, interfering with business deals, showing up at events he knew I would be attending just to make a scene. It was as if he was saying, 'I can't forget my daughter's death, and I won't let you forget either.' And yet I never once thought that he would go so far as to steal our child. I will not sit around waiting to see what he'll do next." He knew frustration colored his voice, making him sound harsher than he'd intended. Standing, Brianna shook her head. "I'm going to go put this little one in her crib. Trent, I wish you'd reconsider whatever it is you have planned. And Sean, I wish you wouldn't help him with all this." She walked out. Trent frowned. He didn't like this sudden capitulation of hers. That wasn't like Bree. He'd have to keep a close eye on her in case she decided to get mixed up in this mess. This struggle was Chapter 5. Jake stood next to Alex as she looked out over the water separating New York from New Jersey. Beside the normal tourist spots, Jake had taken her to his old haunts, bars off the beaten path, old buildings that had survived wars and renovations. Alex had grinned like a kid, had asked more questions than he could answer, and he was having trouble keeping this business only. She wasn't just a pretty face. She'd shown a quick intelligence, and, as he watched her finish the salted pretzel he'd bought her from one of the food carts, he was struck by the duality of her character. One minute, she came across as sophisticated, mature, and utterly independent, and next, she seemed like an innocent who was just stepping out into the world. He wasn't sure how she figured into this thing with Bresi. Was she really only a family friend? Did she know the truth about Bresi? That he was ruthless enough to kidnap a newborn? Was probably capable of even worse than that? He wasn't sure, but she was a connection to Bresi, and that made it worth his time to cultivate a connection to her. Glancing at him, she smiled. "Thank you for today. Mille grazie, we would say in Italy." Jake leaned on the riverside railing. She glanced over, saw another woman walking nearby who appeared to be checking him out, and gave that woman a scowl. Jake bit back a smile. Seemed Alex was the jealous type. He pushed off the railing. "No problem. It was nice to see New York one last time before I fly out. Even nicer having someone to share it with." In fact, he couldn't remember a woman he'd enjoyed spending time with like this. Reaching a hand out, he tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Everything about her, her laugh, her smile, her scent, was getting to him, making it harder to remember that she was a means to an end. He needed information about Marco Bresi. He was being paid to keep an eye on the guy and find out what he was doing back in the States. But his heart wasn't on board with the job. There was something unique about Alex, and that instant attraction he'd felt for her had only deepened as the afternoon had worn on. "When do you fly to Colorado?" Alex. Taking her hand, he started to walk with her back to the bike. "Why isn't a girl like you snapped up already? Are the guys in Italy idiots?" She laughed. "Oh, I had a fiancé. It did not work out well. And my music keeps me happy. I would rather spend an evening with my cello. I do not feel so comfortable in social, what you call, places with strange men." "Like me," he said, his tone dry. "Funny, but you seem not so strange to me. And we both fly to Colorado soon. Out of all the men in New York City, what were the chances I would run into the one moving to a place I hope to make my new home? I think it must be fate. You and I were supposed to meet." Now Jake felt like a heel. It wasn't fate. He'd arranged the meet. He smiled anyway. I'm not a big believer in any kind of fate. Will you take your bike with you to Colorado? Alex asked. She ran a hand over the black monster, a look on her face that said she was dying to ride again. I thought about taking a road trip with her, but with winter coming on, I'm planning to save that for later. The moving company can ship her out with the rest of my stuff. With a smile, she tipped her head. I must get back. Il Signor Bresi will be worrying about me, and I need to dress for dinner. You are going to join us, aren't you? Il Signor Bresi would really like to meet you, I am sure of it. I'd like to meet him as well. Maybe in a dark alley where I could teach him some manners about stealing babies. He faked a wide smile. Why don't I drop you off at your hotel? I'll go home and change and be back to meet you and Mr. Bresi in the hotel lobby. That sounds like a good idea. She grabbed his hand. But I don't want this day to end. You're not like any other man I've ever met. He laughed. Meet a lot of guys, do you? No, not unless they know my father or know Il Signor Bresi. I tire of meeting men who would rather spend time with my father or Marco Bresi than with me. Jake's face heated. He turned to get his helmet to cover the slip. She really was getting to him if a few words could shake him. He dropped Alex off in front.
Chapter 6. Alex practically floated into the hotel with a plan forming in her head, but she wasn't sure if either Marco or Jake would appreciate her idea. Deciding she needed to speak with Marco before saying anything to Jake, she headed up to the adjoining suites Marco had booked for them. She showered and got dressed for dinner in her room, and then headed to the adjoining sitting room. It had a baby grand piano, and her fingers itched for her to sit down and play. Sliding onto the bench, she kicked off her shoes to position her feet on the pedals. Her fingers automatically found their way across the keyboard as the opening strains to Chopin's Nocturne filled the room. This was her mama's favorite piece. She remembered being a small child and listening to her play, the haunting music filling the house. When she needed to work through things in her head, she often found herself playing the moving piece as if from muscle memory, her fingers easily finding the keys while her thoughts strayed to other things. Other things being one Jake Travers. Her fingers stalled on the piano. Perhaps Chopin was not the best choice to play when thinking of this man. She shifted over to Ludovico Einaudi's La Onde and found her mind calming instantly. Her papa had taken her to one of his concerts in Rome as a birthday present, and after he'd brought her backstage to meet Il Signor Einaudi himself. She'd been thrilled to meet him and had used a number of his more minimalist pieces with the children she worked with. Her thoughts strayed once again to Jake, and she stopped playing as she thought back over her afternoon. Today, each time she had climbed on Jake's bike had been a special thrill for her, and she was still trying to process why. Had it been the excitement of the bike itself, the roar of the engine beneath her legs, the wind blowing against her body? Or had the anticipation on her skin and in the pit of her stomach come more from the man riding in front of her? She did not know, but she did not want to give up the most interesting man she had ever met. Sighing, she knew she wouldn't find the answers she needed at the piano, so she flipped the fallboard closed. She slipped her shoes back on, went in search of Marco, finding him pacing in his bedroom, his cell phone in hand and cursing in Italian. Turning, Marco eased into a smile and followed her out to the sitting room. He wore his age well, she thought, better than her own papa. Silver streaked the dark hair at his temples, but his eyes were still sharp. He dressed in handmade suits, and while he did not have the sleek figure of a younger man, he looked solid, respectable, she thought. He shook his head. Someone is challenging my buyout bid for a failing company, and I have to deal with some matters with the American government. Alex nodded. She knew his business was to find companies experiencing financial difficulties and then to take them over and reorganize them. That was about all she knew of his business. Il Signor Bresi would take them apart and sell the pieces for higher profits than what he had paid for the whole. Her own papa had benefited from investing in such ventures with him, and for that she was grateful.
She did not like that someone seemed out to thwart his dealings. She came over to him and sat on a silk-covered sofa. "Is it bad?" He gave a sigh. "I have enemies. All men do. But this one is out to ruin me. If the deals I am working on fall through, it will be a huge loss, not just in money, but to my reputation." Alex frowned. Losses for Marco Bresi would mean losses to her papa as well. That was not good news. Il Signor Bresi's phone rang again. He answered absently. "Prego?" A tentative voice came over the line, a woman's voice, one that had Marco Bresi lift his head as if in amazement. Il Signor Bresi moved to the other room, and Alex picked up a magazine and tried not to eavesdrop, but Il Signor Bresi's voice carried to her. "Brianna Caldwell? Why do you call? A better question, does your husband know you are calling the man he is trying to ruin?" Alex stiffened. The magazine stilled in her hands. Even she had heard of the Caldwells. The husband was a man with a great deal of money and influence, and he was Marco Bresi's enemy? That would make him her father's enemy as well, and hers. She sat up, and now she made no pretense of trying not to listen in on the call. Chapter 7. "Brianna, I never expected to hear from you again. Is your daughter well?" Il Signor Bresi sounded tired, Alex thought. She frowned. She couldn't hear the voice on the other end of the line, but Marco said, "I am sorry. You know I wish her only the best. I still miss my Serena." Chewing her lower lip, Alex got up and moved closer. She had not known Serena Bresi well. She was 2 years younger than Alex and had been a model, one who ran with a fast crowd and had too many boyfriends. Papa had predicted that life for Serena would end up badly, and Alex had not needed his cautions to keep her distance. She thought Serena too beautiful for her own good. Leaning closer, Alex heard a little of the woman's voice on the phone. "Nothing to do. Serena's death." Marco gave a deep sigh. Peeking around the door, Alex saw him sitting on his bed. He was bent now like an old man, rubbing his forehead. "Grief blinds us. Do you think we needed to do what we should have done years ago? We should have talked, but we were each too stubborn to give in first." She didn't hear the woman's answer, but Marco rubbed at his eyes. "I know now. Her actions were hers alone and no one else's." The woman's voice lifted again. "Honestly, I don't know if he's going to listen. Marco cut her off. "Brianna, Trent is out to sabotage my business. I've made his life difficult these last few years. Now he does the same. But it is the innocents who will suffer most." Alex frowned. Did he mean her own papa? She heard the woman mention Denver. See, I must. I'm helping a friend's daughter. I would love for the two of you to meet. Once I return to Italy, she will be alone in a strange city. I would feel better knowing she had someone she could call upon." The woman said something. Marco straightened and Alex ducked away from the doorway. "Yes, well, for now, I've dealt with your IRS, and I am working to hold back the worst. What happens after that, so be it. But what your husband is doing now, I cannot let go without a fight. There is too much at stake. Too many lives will be impacted if I fail." Marco looked so upset that Alex poured them both glasses of wine. The suite came with a fully stocked bar that seemed to cater to guests' specific preferences. They were supposed to go to dinner, but they had a little time yet. She went to the piano and lifted the fallboard. She played a piece she knew well, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. She knew that it was one of his favorites, and she had always thought that particular piece of music sounded as peaceful as moonlight on a lake. She let the music flow through her fingers, let it swell and fade finally. Looking over, she saw that Il Signor Bresi still looked unhappy. Getting up, she walked over to him. "I think we should go to dinner. Jake will be waiting." He gave her a distant smile and waved her away. "I'm not feeling well enough to go out. Why don't you and your new friend enjoy a night out?" Alex watched him for a moment, noticing the stress lines around his mouth and the fatigue pulling at his eyes. She hated when her father looked like this. Please come with us. You need to take your mind off your troubles, and you need to eat, and I would really like for you to meet Jake." Looking up at her, he sipped his wine. He put it down and stood. "Perhaps you are right. Let us go find good food and better company." With a smile, he led the way to the elevator, requesting, "So tell me about this man you met." Alex was delighted to talk about something to distract Il Signor Bresi from his dark mood. "His name is Jake Travers, and he grew up in New York City. He showed me around this afternoon." "That was nice of him. He is meeting us here?" Alex nodded. "He should be waiting downstairs." She listed the sights she had seen, the places they had been, and how she had eaten a New York hot dog and pretzel and a slice of pizza from a cart. He smiled. "And you still have room for more food?" "Yes, but after spending a day amidst all these people, I'm glad we are leaving for Colorado tomorrow. This is perhaps too busy a city. Oh, that reminds me. Jake said he is moving to Colorado as well. He was only here getting his things shipped to Denver. Isn't that a wonderful coincidence?" Marco slowly nodded. Marco nodded. "See, being alone is not a fate I wish. Well, not what I wish for you. Is that your young man there by the motorcycle?" He sounded disapproving and gestured to the front doors. Jake appeared to be having a discussion with the valet about parking. Alex smiled and waved to Jake. She and Marco exited the building, and she walked directly to Jake, Marco following her. She was secretly thrilled when Jake leaned down and kissed her cheek in greeting. She waved a hand. "Jake, I wish you to meet Marco Bresi. This is Jake Travers." Marco shook the man's hand, and for a second, Alex saw two men measuring each other. Jake's eyes seemed to darken, and the handshake seemed to go on a bit too long, as if the men were sizing up each other for strength. Alex wanted to roll her eyes. "A pleasure to meet you, sir." Jake gave a nod, but Alex thought his words seemed a touch cold. But then he glanced at her, and his smile warmed. Marco Bresi gestured toward the limo waiting for them. "Thank you for showing Alex around the city today. I would have done so myself, but several things came up with my business that required my attention. Shall we?" Jake handed Alex into the car, holding onto her hand just a little too long before letting go and slipping inside. The gesture left Alex's face warm. Once in the car, Jake sat next to her, his leg brushing hers. Il Signor Bresi's mood seemed to lighten, and he went out of his way to ask Jake about himself. Marco waved a gloved hand. "The restaurant we go to, it is across the city and necessitates a lengthy drive this time of night, but the food is worth any difficulty. Do you like seafood, Mr. Travers?" Alex listened as Jake steered the topic to Italy and Marco Bresi's trip here. She was content to listen to the low rumble of Jake's voice and let his scent wash over her. He was wearing the same cologne as before, but it seemed stronger now. Sitting so close to him, her stomach gave a small flutter that was not hunger. She could almost wish Il Signor Bresi had stayed in his room this evening. That would have provided an opportunity to get to know Jake on a more personal level. But it was good, too, to see Il Signor Bresi smile a little. And then Jake asked, "Alex, what do you think?" Chapter 8. Jake had asked the question just to bring Alex into the conversation. Marco's questions were becoming more pointed, and there was only so much redirecting of the conversation he could do before Bresi figured out he was avoiding answering some of his questions. Alex had been silent the entire time, and when he looked at her, she had a faraway look to her eyes, making him wonder what thoughts were going around in her head. She had a little smile upon her face, and her eyes had a special glimmer in them. "See?" She looked from him to Marco, blushing, and Jake was now certain she'd been daydreaming. "Sorry, what is it you talk of?" "We need your vote to settle a tie. Would you rather have Sicilian pizza or Northern Italian?" She gave a snort. "Oh, I think I like New York best." Marco offered a smile that seemed indulgent to Jake. "Now you remind me of when I met my Sophia. Almost 20 years she has been gone, but she would always come up with the answer I never expected. Jake glanced at the man. For a moment, the guy seemed almost human. But Jake had learned that even the worst monsters often had a family and could convince themselves they were only doing the right thing. Lines of stress were evident around Marco's eyes, and it was clear he wasn't sleeping well. Jake was fairly sure that was all thanks to Trent, and he made a mental note never to get on the guy's bad side. The limo pulled up in front of a restaurant. They stepped out, but Marco pulled out his phone, glanced at it, and then looked up at Alex. "I'm sorry, Alex. I must return to the office. The call I've been waiting on has just come, and it cannot wait." He frowned at Jake, and for a minute Jake was certain Marco would call off the entire evening. He knew the guy wasn't sure about him, but he gave a nod and a tight smile. "A pleasure to meet you. Please enjoy dinner. Alex, just have everything charged to my account, and the driver will be available when you are ready to return." Alex's mouth pulled down and her eyes darkened, but then she smiled at him and nodded. "We will bring you back something, yes?" Marco patted her hand. "I'll order from the hotel. Have a nice evening, you two." Catching his coat sleeve, she asked. Marco glanced at Jake, his eyes narrowing. Jake had the impression the guy was weighing him, making calculations, and he really hoped he was too distracted to remember Jake's lack of answers in the limo. Jake pushed his hands in his pockets and tried to look innocent. This was too good a deal not to jump at, but he didn't want to seem too eager. Marco glanced once more at Alex, and Jake was sure the guy was having a hard time saying no to her. And who wouldn't with those pleading eyes turned on him? He let out a short breath and asked, "Mr. Travers, is this idea one that works for you? Could you fly out on such short notice?" He sounded like he was hoping Jake would back out. Pulling out a hand, Jake rubbed his jaw. "Well, I've got a ticket booked for the day after tomorrow. The shipping company is set to pick everything up tomorrow morning." Alex grinned. "Good. Then a flight in the afternoon would work for you." "Alex, we don't want to impose on Mr. Travers." Waving away the protest again, Alex shook her head. "Please, it would be such fun." With another breath huffed out, Marco lifted one shoulder. "Very well. Alex and we take my personal jet tomorrow. My business might need my presence in New York beyond today, and to fly back is such an annoyance. If you wish, Alex, you could fly to Denver with Mr. Travers. Would you consider flying with her and helping her get situated at her hotel?" That sounded more like an order to Jake than a request. He tried not to bristle at Marco Bresi, thinking he'd jump when the guy asked him to. Instead, he glanced at Alex. She was biting her lip as if she was trying not to push him into this. Jake forced a smile. He was supposed to keep tabs on Marco Bresi, not the girl with him. But if he backed out of this, Marco might decide he was a flake or unreliable, and there would go his golden opportunity to keep an eye on Marco through Alex. He shoved down his own desire to spend more time with her and tried to consider the angles here. It really boiled down to one thing. Alex was his in with Marco, so he couldn't say no to her without putting himself on the outs with Marco. "That's generous of you, sir." Turning to Alex, he could see a glimmer in her eyes that could be amusement.
"Yes, sir. My buddy lives in Denver. He'll be more than happy to pick us up at the airport. I'll give him a call after dinner and set it up." "Fine. Alex, are those plans good for you?" Marco asked. She held up a hand and waved it, much the way Marco had. "Wonderful. But I hope you will finish your business early and be able to fly with us." Marco shrugged. "This is the life of a businessman. Now, please, if you don't mind, I need to go." He stepped back into the limo. Jake watched the long black car pull back into traffic. The man should really be more cautious about the people he lets get close to him. With a smile, he turned to Alex. Now he had to figure out how she fit into Bresi's life and how she could get him closer to his target. Chapter 9. After dinner, Jake instructed the driver to take them to Central Park. Alex was amused and a bit impressed at his easy assumption of authority. He was definitely a man used to getting his way. He was very much like Il Signor Bresi in that way.
Jake hired one of the horse-drawn carriages and helped Alex up into the seat. The driver tossed a blanket over their legs, and the docile horse set off at a clopping walk through the park. After a few minutes, the movement of the carriage and the large dinner she had eaten lulled her to silence. Jake wrapped his arm around her shoulders, and it seemed like the most natural thing in the world for her to rest her head back and lean against him. "Grazie," she said. "For what?" Jake asked. Reaching out, he took her hand in his and rubbed his thumb over the back of her hand. Her skin tingled and she smiled at him. Perhaps she would consider a fling with Jake Travers. He was so American. She was certain he was just what he seemed, and that suited her. She was so tired of men who wanted to know her only because of a connection to her father or Il Signor Bresi. The perfect end to a perfect day. I have really enjoyed myself. More so than I thought I would. Jake frowned. "Okay, how did you not expect to enjoy New York?" Alex shook her head. "No, not that. I meant that I didn't expect to enjoy spending time with a man so much, with someone such as yourself." She wrinkled her nose. "My papa thinks only of marriage for me." "Let me guess, a nice Italian boy and bambinos?" With a sigh, Alex snuggled closer. She liked the feel of his arm over her shoulders and the touch of his hand on hers. He seemed solid, reliable. She had known him only a day, but it felt as if she had known him for years. "I'm the only girl I know who has to date on the sly. If Papa hears I've been out with someone, he wants to meet the man. Then he wants to start a background check." Jake laughed. She punched his arm. "What is so funny?" "I think I'd be about the same with a daughter. So is Marco Bresi your father's stand-in for this trip? From the way he was grilling me, I was starting to think He bent down, pressed his lips to her forehead, then tipped up her chin. Lights from the park filtered through the bare branches of the trees. The world smelled of wet earth and of the horse pulling the carriage. Her heart beat hard and fast as Jake touched his lips to hers in the whisper of a kiss. Alex felt as if she had caught fire. She wrapped her arm around his neck and pulled him closer. Under the blanket, Jake put a hand on her thigh. For dinner, she had changed into a cocktail dress in royal blue, and now she was glad. He stroked the inside of her thigh, and she gave a soft moan. The carriage rocked to a halt, and Alex managed to pull back. She was lightheaded from those kisses, and she wanted more. Jake grinned at her and came back to her for one more searing kiss. Lifting his head, he said, "Come on, I think Marco's driver is getting cold standing there waiting for us." She giggled. Il Signor Bresi pays him a great deal to have patience. Swinging down from the carriage, Jake turned. He helped her down, holding her body against his for just a moment longer than necessary. She liked the way she fit against him, how he was all hard, lean muscle. She could almost wish they were someplace more secluded. She glanced over at the driver standing alongside the limo a few yards away and let out a breath. She did not want him taking stories back to Il Signor Bresi because she knew that from there they would get back to her father. At the limo, Jake told the driver, "Just drive us around the city so we can see the lights." The driver gave a nod. Alex saw money exchange hands and she slipped into the back. She was pleased when the dividing window slid up, leaving her alone with Jake, who stared at her with a hungry look in his eyes. Chapter 10. Jake knew he was staring at her, and that he shouldn't have kissed her, but still, he wanted to do it again. She sat next to him, hands folded in her lap, almost as prim as a nun, but she sure didn't kiss like one. He was going to have to watch it, or he'd end up more involved than he should. Marco Bresi was the target. She was just part of the job. That was that. But he didn't want to leave it there. Taking hold of her hand, he put an arm around her and pulled her closer. She smiled and lifted an eyebrow. "What are you doing?" Jake settled back against the seat, pulling her with him. "Getting comfortable?" She gave a soft hum and wiggled in her seat. Jake bit back a groan. Honey, the things you do to me. She gave a laugh. I am hardly your honey, and this is simply a result of the chemistry between us. She waved a hand between them. Pretty good chemistry. She put a finger on his chest. You do know I'm not what you Americans would call an easy girl. Oh, nothing about you is easy. I get that. She drew a pattern on his shirt with her fingertip. I like you, but I'm not sure this should go any further. The corner of his mouth curved. The girl had good instincts, and he was sure they should both be listening to them, but he was having a hard time thinking with her this close. He needed to get his head clear, and that meant putting some distance between them. Pulling away from her, he reached into the bar in the back of the limo and pulled out 2 bottles of sparkling water. He opened one and handed it to Alex. Whatever you say. Her mouth pulled down into a pout. Now you're being too literal. With a smile, he leaned over to point out the Chrysler Building, with its Art Deco spire. They drove past other buildings and through Times Square. He tried to keep playing tour guide for her, showing her the sights, but he kept thinking about that kiss he'd taken. She was a woman to reckon with, and one he wanted to get to know better, but the job stood between them. Alex drank her water and lifted one shoulder. It's very bright. Do you have to light up everything in New York? Brighter than clearing his throat, Jake wondered how he was going to hang on, and was that a come-on? An invitation up to her room? He couldn't do it, not if he was going to keep any kind of detachment. He finished his water with a gulp. I can't say the same. I'll probably be up half the night finalizing everything. But... She lifted her head. Jake covered her lips with his own. He drew out the kiss as long as he dared, until his pulse was pounding and her lips had softened. Pulling back, he told her, Give me your cell phone. She fumbled with the small evening clutch she'd been carrying, pulled out her phone, and handed it to him. Jake quickly entered his number and put it back in her palm. He let his fingers linger. Her skin was warm, and he could feel her pulse quicken. I'll be tied up with the movers all morning. Text me when you have the flight information and I'll meet you there. There, that was good. He needed distance. He needed to cool this down a little. He needed Alex as a connection to Marco Bresi, and that was all he needed from her. His body was screaming something else, but he was going to ignore it for now. Alex shook her head. In the dim light from the street, her hair seemed more silver than gold. The soft waves framed her face. She put her hand on his leg. There is no need to take a taxi. When you are ready to go, text your address and the driver will pick you up before we head to the airport. Jake swallowed hard. The way she said it, that soft accent in her voice, sounded even more like a come-on. Thankfully, the limo pulled up in front of the hotel. He slipped out and turned to hold out his hand to her. She eased out of the car, her skirt riding up in a way that showed off long, curvy legs. He couldn't help but look. Once she was in front of him, she put out her hand, took his in hers. I wish this night never had to end. Okay, that was definitely a come-on, and he was going to ignore it, too. He shook her hand like this was business, then gave up on trying to play it cool and lifted her hand to place a kiss on her palm. See you tomorrow, princess. She smiled. He noticed the dimples for the first time. Princess? I think I like that. He walked her to the entrance of the hotel, leaving her at the door. He then gave a nod, turned, and headed for the valet. He wasn't going to look back. He told himself that a dozen times, but he did anyway, and saw her watching him from the door. That lush mouth of hers tipped up and smiling. She gave a little wave of her fingers and headed into the hotel. Jake peeled off a couple of 20s for the valet. He'd convinced them with a bigger tip earlier to leave his bike parked in front and not touch it. They'd lived up to the deal. He climbed on and decided he needed to take the long way home. He needed cold air on his face to clear his head, and to help him remember this was about keeping tabs on Marco Bresi for Trent Caldwell. This was a job. One he now wanted to quit so he could spend time with a woman whose eyes seemed to reach into his soul. Chapter 11. Jake paced his hotel room as he waited for Sean Marshall to pick up the phone. His digs weren't as high-end as the place where Alex was staying with Marco Bresi. He could hear New York traffic, sirens, horns honking, and the occasional yell of a cab driver bounce up to his floor. Light drifted in through the curtains. The bed looked hard. The room was Spartan and tiny, and still the place cost $300 a night. Good thing MJI was picking up the tab. Deciding to leave the Navy had been a difficult decision for him, as he'd always thought of himself as a careerist. The SEALs were his life. But during the last 2 missions, teammates had died. He'd ended up injured both times, and the finger-pointing and bureaucratic red tape that took place with the higher-ups left a bad taste in his mouth. He'd decided enough was enough and had elected not to renew his SEAL contract. Somehow, Sean had found out about it, and on his first day as a civilian, Sean had called him to ask what his plans were. Not having any, he'd been interested when Sean had asked if he wanted to work with him. He started out doing distance surveillance, then shifted over to embedding himself with the mark and the role play that could come with it. Compared to being in the line of fire, it was easy work, and he enjoyed the variety of cases. Sean Marshall finally answered, his voice alert and not the least sleepy.
Travers?
Mentally, Jake adjusted for the time differences. It'd be 2 hours earlier in the evening in Colorado. He kept to the facts of the day, what he'd learned and what had happened. So it was either fly to Denver tomorrow or risk losing my in with Alexandra Moretti. She's my contact to Marco.
Moretti? Bresi's got ties to the Moretti family back in Italy?
Yeah, it seems like Bresi's an old pal to her father. I'm not sure she knows much about Bresi's history with Trent Caldwell.
What about Bresi? Sean asked. He on the same flight with you?
Don't know yet. He's looking pretty stressed out. Said he might stay behind to deal with something he's got cooking. You wouldn't happen to know about why it might be going south, would you?
Sean sighed loudly. What, am I your taxi service? And it's Alex now?
Jake ignored the questions. He paced back across the thin carpet. The place smelled of years of stale smoke, even though it was a non-smoking room.
You're my old military pal who has a job for me, at least as far as Alex is concerned, and you're happy to pick us up. Marco's arranging for her to stay at Brown's. Where's Longmont from Denver?
About 40 minutes up I-25. Why? Sean asked.
I dug into her background. She's got an offer from some nonprofit that works with kids. Longmont would put her between the 2 largest universities that might offer her research space and possibly a teaching position. There's something you're not saying, Jake. I can hear it between all the stuff you're telling me that's not relevant. This Alex, she getting to you?
Jake scrubbed a hand across the back of his neck. He'd been hoping he hadn't let on how much with his voice, but it was hard to put anything over on Sean. Not only did they go back, way back, given that they'd been through recruit training together along with Sean's business partner, Seth, but you didn't serve together without learning to read the other guy.
I'm still trying to figure how she fits into Bresi's plans, whatever they are.
The silence went on long enough that Jake glanced at his phone to make sure the signal hadn't dropped. Sean's voice finally came back.
Have a good flight, and watch yourself.
Thanks. Jake disconnected the call. He sat down on the edge of the too-hard bed and stared at his hands. With a curse, he got up and pulled out his laptop. He needed to be doing something. 2 hours later, he had a better idea of what was keeping Marco Bresi occupied. He'd pulled out bits and pieces of news, had connected the dots, and then called a friend with Wall Street connections who always knew all financial deals pending. It seemed that Marco Bresi had been forced to deal with some issues with the IRS, which had led to some questions from the SEC. Run-of-the-mill stuff, according to his contact, but then things got dicey. For the last several months, he'd been working on a takeover of a Canadian diamond company. Bresi had had a handshake deal, and he'd already put money into it that was non-returnable. But now, rumor was that the company had a better offer.
Jake frowned at the computer screen. If Trent Caldwell was the U.S. offer pending, he might be headed to Canada to cement the deal. Would Marco head there too? And would he want to take Alex with him? Slapping the laptop closed, Jake decided he needed a long shower and sleep. He was thinking too much about Alex and not enough about Marco Bresi. He had to keep his focus here. His phone pinged with a text and he looked, thinking it was his contact with more information. It was Alex. Wanted to thank you for a lovely evening. See you tomorrow. And just like that, his focus was back on her, and he knew that he would be making that a cold shower. Chapter 12. Alex was looking forward to several hours in a plane with the very handsome Jake Travers. She was even thinking perhaps they might become lovers. Her face warmed at the idea as she sipped her coffee and stared out the hotel window, waiting for Jake's call to say he was ready to leave New York. Lovers. She toyed with the idea. It was a good one, she thought. After her disappointment with Ricardo, she had dated a little, some to please her papa and some to please herself. She had found men who would take her dancing, she had kissed a few, slept with one she had thought herself in love with, and had found all of it something of a disappointment. She did not think Jake Travers would disappoint. But how did one go about seducing an American man? Did they like blunt women? Or did they prefer to be the ones to, what was the phrase? Put on the moves? She let out a sigh. In Italy, this would be easy. You smiled at a man and he smiled back. If you wished for more, it would simply happen. Jake. She thought there was far more to Jake than the easygoing persona he showed to the world. That interested her. He was like a piece by Mozart, complex with layers upon layers. She wanted to dig into those layers. She wanted to know more about him. He excited her in a way no man ever had. But was he interested in her? That puzzled her. She had all but invited him to her room last night, and he hadn't taken her up on her offer. Did he have a girlfriend? But if so, why had he kissed her? Had he recently come out of an unhappy relationship and now was being cautious? Or was he perhaps not that interested? She wished this was more like Italy, where she could smile and he would smile back, and matters would take care of themselves. But she was in America. She would have to do what the American woman did on the television shows. She would wear tight dresses and lean over a lot. Jake's text came at last. Alex stopped by Il Signor Bresi's room to say her goodbyes. At breakfast, he had told her he would be detained in New York and might even have to fly to Toronto before coming to Denver. He looked so worried, his eyes red from lack of sleep and his shirt rumpled when she had never seen it so much. Heading downstairs, she smiled at the driver and stepped into the limo. She gave him Jake's address, and the limo eased into traffic. It seemed to her to take forever, but at last she saw Jake, standing on a street corner, his hair ruffling in the breeze and a backpack slung over one shoulder. He was wearing faded jeans with a black t-shirt and the leather jacket, and her mouth watered. He looked rugged and so unlike the boys in Italy that she had dated. He looked wonderful, very American. His face warmed with the crooked smile she was starting to know so well. He didn't wait for the driver to get out to open the door, but stepped up to the limo and slipped inside with an athletic grace that characterized all his moves. She smiled and gestured to the fresh coffee and juice on offer in the limo. Buongiorno. Did you sleep well? He grimaced and opted for juice. So did she. On the drive, they talked of Denver. She had never been, but she had read up on the city. Jake, however, had been there twice, and he warned her to be careful of the altitude. First time I stepped off the plane, guy right in front of me took one breath and face planted right into the ground. Mile high. And the guy had been drinking the whole flight. Altitude and alcohol are a bad mix. She had thought things might be uneasy between them after last night's kiss. But it wasn't. Jake was as he had been yesterday. Warm, friendly, with a sparkle in his eyes that drew her in. She shifted in her seat and watched his stare shift to her legs. She smiled.
She had been right to wear a tunic dress and a patterned bronze silk. At the airport, the driver took them out to the tarmac and Il Signor Bresi's waiting jet. The pilot welcomed them, and a flight attendant provided them their drinks of choice, water for her and coffee for Jake, before leaving the main cabin and heading to the galley. As the engine hum lifted, Jake settled back in his leather seat across the aisle from her and said, "I could get used to this." Alex nodded. "I travel a little on commercial flights, but this is infinitely more enjoyable. The last time I flew from Paris to Milan, a young woman had a baby with her that cried the entire flight. She smoothed her hand over the leather of the seat arm. "We could watch a movie if you wish." She was suddenly nervous at the thought of having 4 hours with him. When he had stepped into the jet, she had fought the urge to invite him to sit next to her. Now that they were virtually alone, the tension between them seemed to stretch like a thread, and she was at a loss for how to deal with it. He gave a shrug. "Movie sounds fine." The jet started to taxi. The engine sound increased, and Alex gripped the armrests of her seat. "Nervous flyer?" Jake asked. She glanced at him and managed a stiff smile. "Just at the takeoffs and the landings, and I do not like it when the air is rough." Reaching out across the aisle, he took her hand. "Here, hang on to me." She clutched his hand and closed her eyes. She could feel the ground under them, the wheels rough on the pavement, and she braced for that instant when solid earth disappeared. Her stomach would dip and she would... Suddenly, Jake was next to her, not in the seat across from her, but with his body tucked close and the armrest between the seats pushed up. He put his arm over her shoulders and pulled her even closer to him. "Just think about me," he said, his voice rough and low. She turned her face into his chest. He smelled of leather and the aftershave he used, something with a touch of sandalwood. She clung to him with both hands and admitted, "I hate to fly." He laughed. "Hey, you made it across the Atlantic. Besides, this beats jumping out of a plane." Pulling back, she stared at him. "You jumped out of planes?" "Yeah, usually into the worst spots possible. I was a Navy SEAL. They don't give you any choice about the places you go, but you do see a lot of the world, just not always in the way you would have chosen. Like jumping out of a plane and having to free fall a few thousand feet." He grimaced. "Not my idea of fun." He started in on stories of when he was in training, describing some of the people he served with, and Alex almost forgot to worry. The moment came when the jet lifted into the air. Her stomach lurched, but Jake kept talking, his voice smooth and touched.
"Oh no, never that." He touched a finger to her cheek and then pulled back. "Takes courage to do something even when it terrifies you. Now me, I'm a total chicken when it comes to snakes. You won't see me getting within a mile of them if I can help it. I grew up with foster parents, and they decided to take all us kids, there were 3 of us at the time, to the zoo, to the snake house. Place gave me nightmares for a month, and my foster brothers wouldn't let me hear the end of it." She smiled and tipped her head to one side. "So you were fostered. You must miss your parents." He shrugged and pulled off his jacket. It was growing warm in the jet. "Wasn't old enough to know them, so no, didn't miss them that much. Had a great set of foster parents, the Franklins. They liked kids, couldn't have any, so they took in as many as they could. We were up to 6 at one point." The flight attendant brought out the meal, salads, pasta, roast lamb. Alex knew she couldn't eat. Her stomach was still jumpy. She opted for a small glass of wine, a Chianti that might settle her nerves, but Jake stuck with water. The food sat at the table hardly touched, and Alex remembered her earlier offer of a movie. "Do you have a preference as to what you want to watch?" He smiled at her, a slow smile. "Don't mind watching you." She stood and pulled in a breath. She would rather be in his arms than anywhere, and as always when she flew, she had thoughts of the plane falling from the sky.
She did not want to die and miss being with Jake Travers. Taking his hand, she tugged on him. "Come, why don't I give you a tour?" She took him to the galley where they surprised the flight attendant. Alex told the girl to please make sure the pilot and co-pilot were fed as well. Then she led Jake to the back of the plane. "And these are the bathrooms. There is a full shower, as you see, and the bedrooms. There are 2. I slept here on the flight from Italy, or I tried to. Mostly I sat and shivered at every bump." Walking into the small bedroom, she turned. The room was mostly taken up by the bed, the walls pale blue and curved. The jet hit a pocket of turbulence and shuddered. Alex grabbed Jake's hand.
She smiled. "I like the sound of that." Reaching up, she tugged on his jacket, pulling his mouth down to hers. The kiss was like before, explosive. Her face warmed, and the heat spread through her with a flash. She wanted her skin against his. She wanted him. He would make her forget the dangers of flying, and he would give her memories that she would treasure always. Untangling herself, she stepped back and pulled her dress off over her head, leaving herself only in her bra and panties. Chapter 13. Alex felt amazing. Alive. She had forgotten her fear of flying, for her soul had flown instead. Jake helped her up and out of what was left of her black lace lingerie set. It hadn't survived the encounter that well. She showered first, since the tiny shower, alas, did not accommodate more than one, and came out wrapped in a towel that he pulled off her. She giggled, and he swept her up in his arms and kissed her. When he set her down, she thought her legs might give out, and she wobbled a little on her feet. He gave a throaty chuckle as he waited for her to be able to stand before he let go. Their passion had been unlike anything she'd ever experienced before, except for maybe through her music. He had marked her, possessed her. Their lovemaking had been an explosion of the senses, the likes of which she had only read about or seen in the theaters. She'd never once ever thought she would experience anything so passionate for herself, and she had loved every moment of it. No man had ever done what he had done to her. All of it had ignited desires she had never known she had, and she definitely wanted more. More of him, more of everything, and they would both be in Denver. Her underwear was a loss. The bra was still wearable, but the panties she hid in her purse. Jake exited the shower, drying his hair, and saw her pull her dress on over her head. He came over to her and slipped a hand up under the dress, caressing her butt. "You're going to drive me crazy, knowing you don't have anything on under this." She smiled at him and touched the rough stubble on his cheek. She could still feel where his beard had abraded her skin. "I hope so." Retreating to the leather seat she had occupied before, she picked up her wine and called back, "Why don't you come over here and sit with me?" "Said the spider to the fly," he murmured. She frowned. She did not know that saying, but he sat next to her. The flight attendant had cleared away their uneaten meal while they were otherwise occupied, and she now brought out wine and cut fruit with a selection of cheeses. Alex's stomach growled and she nibbled on the food selection, pleased that it wasn't too heavy. Needing to redirect her thoughts, Alex asked about a movie, and the flight attendant found something and started it for them. Even though she had showered, she was certain everyone must know what she and Jake had done. She felt, owned by him. No man had ever made her shiver or experience such sensations as he did, and she couldn't wait to do more with him. She frowned at herself. Lovers were meant to be enjoyed, but nothing more. She had her work, and that must come first. There were universities in and near Denver that were interested in her research and had hinted at finding a place for her within their music programs. Colorado hadn't been high on her list of places to live, but knowing that Jake would be there made it all the more enticing. Her life needed a bit of adventure, and she suspected that Jake would provide her with just that and more. Except he was definitely not a man her papa would want her to marry. He was American,
She had no idea what he really did for a living, and he rode a motorcycle. All good things for a man who would bring her excitement and adventure, but not suitable for a husband. He glanced at her, smiled, and whispered, "You okay?" Alex nodded. Leaning close, he put a hand on her thigh and squeezed. His fingers drifted up to where she had no underwear. "Do I make you nervous, Alexandra?" he asked. Glancing toward the galley where she could hear the flight attendant, she slapped his hand. "You are like a small boy who cannot behave." "Oh, I can. When there's a need for it, which isn't now." His fingers skirted up to between her legs and down again. Too embarrassed and excited to speak, Alex could only pull in a breath as those familiar sensations began to take over. He really was incorrigible. Jake chuckled, the tone of his voice making her go weak-kneed. "I don't mind taking things slow, if you need to slow this down. I just don't want a one-night stand. Or is this a one-jet stand?" Alex smiled. She shook her head before leaning against his shoulder. "Never have I met anyone like you. I feel like I've known you forever, but we just met. How is that possible?" "Kismet?" She shook her head. "You do not believe in fate." "Oh, sweet is on the bottom of the list there." She nodded. "I heard, hotel first, then dinner." "Nothing's set in stone, princess, except one thing. You call the shots." Alex smiled, but she wondered if he was right. She had a feeling that what existed between them was something beyond anyone's control. Chapter 14. The descent into Denver was far bumpier than expected. Jake did his best to keep Alex distracted with stories, but he wasn't very successful. Her pallor had shifted between white and green several times, and he worried that she might get sick. The flight attendant had been able to give them some hard candies to suck on, which had helped with the ear popping, but Alex was still a shaking mess. She'd ended up burying her head in his shoulder, letting him hold her tight during the landing. As the plane taxied to the hangar, he tried to get her to sit up, but she refused to move until the plane came to a complete stop. At that point, she rose on shaky legs and stumbled against him. Pulling her into a standing embrace, he held her before kissing the top of her head. "How on earth did you make it across the Atlantic?" Alex sniffled and managed to laugh while Jake took the proffered tissue from the flight attendant so she could dry her eyes and blow her nose. "Drugs," she reluctantly admitted. "I took a sleeping pill and slept nearly the whole way." Placing his hand on her neck, he gave it a light squeeze. "Princess, why didn't you do that this time? It would have saved you so much anxiety." Alex bit her lower lip as she tried to step away, but Jake wanted an answer. "Well?" "I wanted to spend time with you, and I had hoped that it wouldn't be so bad crossing over land, and it wasn't. At least when you were distracting me in all those delicious ways." "Well then, the next time we travel, I will have to do a much better job of keeping you distracted the entire trip." Jake chuckled at her blush and gave her a tender kiss, then helped her gather her things. When they deplaned, she excused herself, telling him she wouldn't be long, before she bolted for the nearest bathroom. He hoped she wasn't throwing up the little food and wine she'd had on the plane. As he settled down to wait for her, he saw the fuel truck leave the plane and the pilot reboard, then watched as the plane backed away from the hangar and headed toward the nearest runway. Guessing it was returning to New York for Bresi, he called the guy he'd left on him for an update. Apparently, Bresi had spent several hours with a lawyer and didn't—
Sean listened, then said, "I'll be there soon. Bresi's not the only one headed north. Trent's taking his jet to Toronto, too." Jake shifted his phone and glanced at the women's restroom. No sign of Alex yet. Those two going to have it out, face to face? Don't know, but Trent's sure he can't let Bresi have another opportunity to hurt his wife or daughter. Bree's trying to coax him into talking with him and coming to some sort of compromise, but that's not really Trent's style. At least, not where his family is concerned. Ever since baby Faith's kidnapping, the man has been vibrating with anger every time Bresi's name comes up. It's not like him to hold on to a vendetta like this, and I'm worried." Jake frowned. While he could understand Trent Caldwell's anger over the kidnapping, he didn't think his intense need for revenge was particularly healthy for him or his family. He'd been around enough guys like him who were more concerned about coming out on top than finding a reasonable solution, and some had ended up in an early grave. From what little he knew of Marco Bresi, based on what he'd read and what he'd gathered from their brief interaction, he suspected that the two men were probably more alike than either one of them wanted to admit. Both were rich and used to ordering the world as they pleased. Guys like that generally didn't give up unless someone knocked them upside the head. "I've got my guy on him until he's wheels up for Toronto. I'm assuming you have someone to take over when he arrives in Canada? Or do you want me to handle that?" he asked. Over the phone, he heard Sean push out a breath. "I've got someone lined up already, so we're good there." "Good. I'm waiting on Alex to get out of the bathroom, so we'll see you in a few, old friend." Sean grumbled into the phone. Yeah, one chauffeur on the way." Chapter 15. Marco finished making plans to fly to Toronto and was now waiting on his pilot to return from Denver. He'd contemplated bringing Alexandra with him to Canada, but she had been so excited at the prospect of meeting with the director at that nonprofit in Denver that he could not say no to her. She was so like his Serena in that way, so charming and enthusiastic that he could not help but find himself wrapped around her little finger. No wonder her papa had so much difficulty finding her a suitable husband. He smiled at the thought. He'd spoken with his inside man at the company who had assured Marco that Trent Caldwell was expected in a meeting the next afternoon. The man had been very informative, providing him with everything he needed to know about Caldwell's upcoming meeting. His insider had been part of the original discussions between his organization and Diamante Global, and he'd been quite dismayed when the board had decided to consider another offer. Marco knew that money talked in situations like this, but Caldwell's offer was so over the top that Marco didn't have a chance of offering anything close to that amount to sway the board back in his direction, and that was distressing. His investors were counting on him, as were the people who worked for him. If Marco failed, the financial impact would be devastating. If he could not meet with Trent Caldwell and could come to any sort of truce, all would be over for him. He poured himself some scotch and went through the proposed agreement Caldwell Enterprises had submitted, shaking his head. Even at a young age, Trent Caldwell was a formidable business adversary, impressing Marco with his business prowess. His father had been the same way. Under different circumstances, Marco would have liked to have been allies. When he'd first found out that Caldwell was dating his daughter, he'd been furious. Trent was too old for Serena, and he had resources at his disposal which would expose Serena to too many temptations. When she had started partying more, Marco had placed her on an allowance that he had hoped would curtail some of her more extreme activities. While it was indeed generous, especially since realistically she could have anything she wanted above and beyond that simply by asking him for it, knowing he'd never refuse her. His Serena had bristled at the very idea of her freedom being restricted in any way. His daughter wanted what she wanted when she wanted it, and she didn't see the point in having to ask. She was very much like him in that respect. He'd been quick to realize that his daughter had probably chosen Caldwell for his wealth and his influence, knowing he could open doors for her as a model. Then things had started going south. Serena had become distant with him, ignoring his phone calls, refusing to answer his questions when he went to visit her in person. He'd pleaded with Caldwell for help, but he now knew that it had been too late. Serena's fast lifestyle turned out to be her undoing. He finished his drink and contemplated another, but eventually set the empty glass down and placed a call home, eager to get an update on the situation with Velarde and Vittorio Enterprises. That was another company that Caldwell had thought to insert himself in, but thanks to his direct contact with Michelangelo Velarde, everything appeared to remain on track.
However, there were some minor details that required a delicate touch that was beyond the abilities of his second-in-command, Petro Scalini. Mrs. Panturo, his assistant and the woman who had looked after him and Serena for so many years, answered the phone at the estate in Verona, and Marco asked how things progressed. "It will be well. How is Miss Moretti getting along?" she asked, her tone sharp. He knew she did not care for the Morettis, though he had never understood why. He and Angelo had been friends for decades. Marco drummed his fingers on the table. He did not need more trouble now. "What is it you think I've done now?" "Nothing, but this business trouble you are having, Marco. Enough is enough. You cannot keep competing with this younger man. You are chasing a ghost and it is time—"
"I did," Mrs. Panturo said, her words slow and measured. "But when it was no longer talk, it became a mess, did it not? I was shot, and the situation now is even worse. You will lose everything if you do not stop this feud. Your place is here in Italy, not attempting to insinuate yourself into this other man's business." He did not need more lectures right now. "Mrs. Panturo, you forget your place. I will deal with things as I see fit." Mrs. Panturo murmured vague words and asked, "Will you be leaving Miss Moretti in the States?" "It is yet to be determined. She is meeting with different universities and organizations to discuss her research." He thought of the young man she had met. He was not certain he approved of the man, an American who rode a motorcycle. Why not take up with a cowboy? He drummed his fingers again, then said, "There is someone I wish you to look into. A man named Jake Travers. I want a full background on him. Everything you can find." He hung up and sat staring at his phone, wondering when things would ever again go right for him. And was this Jake Travers someone who would be good for Alexandra Moretti? Or was she at risk, like his Bambina had been? Chapter 16. Sean meet Alexandra Moretti. Alex smiled at the big man and shook the hand he had offered. "Please, call me Alex. It's a pleasure to meet you." He looked very much like what she thought an American from Colorado should look like, dressed casually and appearing as if he had been out chopping wood earlier. She had taken her time in the bathroom to brush out her hair and fix her makeup and get her legs back under her. Was that not the saying? It was her ritual any time she landed. And then she'd called Papa to let him know she'd arrived safely in Denver. She'd almost told him something about Jake Travers, but while they might be lovers, it was far too soon to be telling her Papa anything about him. And what would she say? "I met a man in New York and had sex on the plane, and I might be in love?" Papa would want to know what he did for a living, if he was rich or poor, and all about his family, which he did not seem to have, for he had been a foster child. She forced a smile and tried to focus on Jake and his friend Sean. They had been met in front of the airport. Sean had had no way to get to the tarmac and the private jet's landing strip. Now he was asking about the flight, and Alex couldn't stop the heat that scalded her face as she thought about what she and Jake had done. "Good," Jake answered, as if nothing of any importance had happened. Alex felt Sean's stare on her and wondered if he knew. Was it really marked on her that they'd had sex on that jet? In the parking lot, Alex insisted on sitting in the back seat. "You must have much to catch up on with your friend," she said. This gave her a chance to watch Jake as he talked with his friend. The two men seemed on easy terms but talked mostly of sports and teams, not mentioning anything of family or work. Were all Americans like this? Before she knew it, they had entered the heart of the city and were pulling up in front of the hotel where Il Signor Bresi had reserved rooms. Brown's, she knew, was old for Denver. Built back when this had been the Old West, it still had touches of those wild days, including a famous restaurant. A steakhouse. Americans seemed to love their beef, and this was cattle country. Jake shook his friend's hand and slapped his shoulder. "Thanks for the ride." The desk clerk smiled as they approached, and then he smiled wider once he heard Il Signor Bresi's name. Alex's bags were taken upstairs right away. She found the suite not as large as the one in New York,
but she liked the view of rugged mountains with snow on them. She would have to ask about skiing. She called out to Jake, "Make yourself comfortable. I wish to take a bath." She headed into the bathroom. She wanted a long soak. She was sore from what had happened on the plane. She ran the hot water, found bath salts to add, provided by the hotel. She hummed as she soaked. She would have to see about getting a piano in her room. This hotel did not have one, not like in New York. When the water cooled, she got out of the tub. Wrapping her robe tightly around herself, she came out to find Jake had dinner waiting. A table had been set up near the windows, white cloth, candles, crystal, and silverware. She was starving. But she glanced at Jake and saw his eyes darken. Her mouth dried. He came over to her and tugged at the knot on her robe. "What, is your self-control wavering?" she asked. "No, it's totally shot." He got the robe undone and slipped it off her shoulders. The white terry cloth pooled around her feet. She saw desire flare to life in his eyes. "You were planning to get dressed for dinner, right?" he asked, his voice hoarse and gravelly. She smiled and waved a hand. "I could not decide what to wear." "Good choice." Stepping close, he kissed her. She reached for his t-shirt and fumbled with it. Breaking away, she frowned at him. "Why can you not wear shirts that button?" He ripped off the t-shirt, toed off his shoes, and unzipped his jeans before letting them fall. "Better?" he asked. She nodded and came closer, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Much. Now I think you should show me if sex with you is different on land than it was on the plane." Jake pulled her to him and kissed her like she was the last meal on earth. After, they laid in each other's arms and she gave a small chuckle, then said, "I think we will need clean sheets." Jake kissed her. "Nah, just dinner and then it's time for the next round." Chapter 17. Alex woke to the sound of the shower running. Sunlight streamed in the windows. They had stayed up all night, completely attuned to each other, exploring their bodies. Alex didn't think it was possible to experience so many different types of pleasure, with each one more intense than the last. They had fallen asleep near dawn and must have slept most of the morning. She smiled and stretched. Every muscle felt used and tingling. The things Jake had shown her, had made her feel, would stay with her forever. She knew he wanted more. He'd said as much when they were on the plane. The plane! She threw her arms over her head and smiled up at the ceiling. He'd played her body like a prized musical instrument, and every moment had been glorious. She had no idea that it could be that way. And she was even more grateful that Ricardo had shown his true colors, because Alex knew that life with him would have been lackluster at best. The shower continued. She thought of joining Jake there, but then the hotel phone rang. She answered it to hear Il Signor Bresi's voice. She sat up, clutching the sheets to her chest. "Signore, I should have called you yesterday to let you know we arrived. How are you? Is everything okay?" "It is good to hear your voice. I am in Toronto, but I needed to speak with you about something concerning. I wish I had done this sooner, and it's my fault for any repercussions. For that, you have my sincerest apologies, Alexandra." Alex shifted to the side of the bed and put her feet on the floor. "Signore, you are scaring me. What is it?" "Alexandra, I call to caution you. I must admit that I was a bit concerned at how quickly you became enamored with this Jake Travers. I asked Mrs. Panturo to look into him. This Jake was in the military, see?" Smiling at his concern. "He was, yes. He said he was a SEAL? Is there a problem with that?" "No, not with that. But he served with both Sean Marshall and Seth Jacobson." Again, Alex nodded even though he couldn't see her. "I do not know this Seth, but I met Sean yesterday. He seems very nice." Alex smiled as she remembered Sean calling Jake pretty boy. Shaking her head, Alex rubbed at a spot between her eyebrows. How could this be? Jake was using her? But what of what they had done and everything he had said? Was it all a lie and a means to get closer to Il Signor Bresi? She did not want to think it could possibly be true, but her stomach knotted with worry. She thought back to their early encounters to figure out if Jake had been overly curious about Il Signor Bresi, and the more she thought about it, the less she knew. Had it all been an act with him? She bit her lip, fighting back tears. Now was not the time. I promised your papa to look after you, and now I fear I am doing as poorly as I did with my dear Serena. I pray that you are safe. Alex pushed her hair back. Yes, Signore. Your warning comes in time. Don't worry about me. She asked after his business while she tried to collect her thoughts, and he promised to be in Denver soon. He hung up, and Alex shot out of bed and paced. She needed to put some distance between herself and Jake, and she knew just how to do it. She dug into her luggage, pulling out a pantsuit in black that clung to her curves. She wanted something that would make her feel strong. She brushed out her hair. Oh, how she wanted a bath. And put it up in a chignon. Even though she knew she would shower soon, she added a bit of makeup for extra armor and called for coffee to be sent up. Jake came out of the shower, smiling, a towel wrapped around him. She faced him. His eyes widened, but then he gave her a sideways look. Wow. And why? How do I look? She waved a hand at herself. Beautiful. But then again, you look beautiful in everything. Or nothing. Room service arrived. She directed them to wheel in the cart and then poured herself a cup. She was pleased her hands didn't shake. Jake had retreated to the bathroom with his jeans. Moments later, he came out, jeans on but the top button undone, and she hated that she wanted to put her hands on him again. I might need to keep you locked up so the rest of the male population doesn't get themselves in trouble. Might you? Chapter 18. Jake frowned. This whole thing was about to go sideways on him, and he wasn't sure how that had happened. He had been careful, but clearly someone had connected him to Caldwell, and now anything he said would go wrong. He needed time, so he shook his head. I think I should go. She nodded. Yes, I think so too. And don't come back. She headed to the door and held it open. Jake pulled on his t-shirt, found his shoes, grabbed his backpack, and headed for the door. He stopped there. Alex had ice in her eyes. He shook his head again. What we had, what we have, that's not a lie. That wasn't supposed to be part of it. So you admit that you were using me? It was a statement since she clearly wasn't expecting him to deny it. How could he? He swallowed hard. He knew better than to get involved with a target, but Alex had been different. Was different. From the moment he'd laid eyes on her, a part of him had been trying to find a way out of the job. Sean had been on to him almost from the beginning. He should have listened to his gut, but Jake had never backed away from a job, and he'd foolishly thought he could handle both. Find out what Bresi was up to, and have a relationship with Alex. He'd failed at both. One eyebrow arched higher. She said nothing more to him. He walked out, and she slammed the door behind him. How was he ever going to convince her that even though she'd started out as a means to his target, she'd become the woman he couldn't live without? That thought alone startled him. How had she become so important to him so fast? He went downstairs and found a quiet table in the hotel bar that overlooked the entryway. He contemplated ordering a drink, settling instead for a late breakfast, which sat like lead in his stomach. He'd screwed up. Completely. He considered walking away, but he knew that he couldn't do that. Not where Alex was concerned. The job was no longer important to him, but Alex was as important as every breath he took. and he had no idea how he was ever going to get her to see that.
When the waiter came over to see if he wanted anything else, he asked if the hotel offered car rentals and was pleased when the waiter said yes. Arranging for a car, he watched as it was brought out to the turnabout in front of the hotel entrance. Dropping a couple 20s on the table, he went out to sign for the car. He'd just gotten behind the wheel when he saw Alex exit the hotel. She'd showered and changed into something less austere, but she still looked beautiful. He growled when he saw both the concierge and the valet attendant checking her out. A black town car pulled around and she got into the back. He ended up tailing Alex around Denver. She stopped at a nearby university and met with someone who appeared to be the dean of the music school. At the conclusion of the meeting, they were both smiling as he walked her out to the waiting car. She then went to a nearby shopping mall, and he groaned when he saw her carrying a bag from a well-known lingerie store. He didn't think he could handle much more, and was pleased when she returned to her hotel and didn't venture out again that evening. Sitting outside the hotel in his rental car that smelled of stale coffee, his, and cleaner, from the rental company, Jake figured he was royally screwed. Alex was never going to forgive him. He got a call from Sean at 10 that night. "You're off the hook." Jake frowned. "What?" "Job's over. Trent and Marco met up in Toronto." "Did they kill each other?" Jake asked. He shifted in his seat. His butt was going to sleep on him. "Good guess, but no. Brianna flew up as well. Forced them to sit down and talk, which included making them work out a deal that'll keep everyone happy and protect their investors." Sean laughed. "From what I heard, Brianna was relentless, and both of them were forced to eat crow. Trent is heading back to Denver with Brianna tomorrow." "And Marco?" "No idea. He's no longer my problem." Jake thought quickly. "Who's babysitting Faith?" "You're talking to him." An idea started to stir. "Hey, tomorrow, mind if I borrow you and Faith?" He filled in Sean on what went down with Alex. Sean offered up a long whistle. "Dude, maybe you should accept failure and walk away before things get worse." Jake shook his head and blew out a breath.
"You're talking to a desperate man, so will you help? I'm at a loss as to what else to do. I don't think she'll listen to me otherwise."
Sean laughed. "So, pretty boy finally met his match. Sounds like you're well and truly caught, all right. Only if this works. Otherwise, I'm toast. Meet you tomorrow." It took more phone calls, favors called in, and cash spread around, but he finally had everything set. Then he only had to wait and worry.
Chapter 19. How absurd that she was missing Jake. Less than 2 days apart from him, and her heart ached. She felt as if she had cut off her arm, even though all she'd done was cut off a snake. He was nothing more than a man who wanted her for her connection to Il Signor Bresi. He was no better than Ricardo. No, he was worse than Ricardo. Well, she was done with Jake Travers. In fact, she was done with all men. She had her work to focus on and keep her happy, if only it would. Her first meeting at a local university had been productive. The dean of the music department had been very excited to hear her ideas and had made some interesting suggestions in terms of areas of research. He had suggested that she might want to consider creating a hybrid program between the music and education departments, with specific emphasis on early developmental education. He had also hinted at a potential assistant professor position, which under normal circumstances would have excited her. She had smiled at the man and gone through all the motions, but her enthusiasm was only skin deep. She needed to adjust her mindset. Alex arranged for a piano to be brought to her hotel suite. In the meantime, she pulled out her cello, but her music would not come. She sat there lost in thought and immediately began daydreaming. Her fingers wanted to stroke Jake's skin. She wanted him in her arms, not the cold body of her cello. It was all wrong. Putting away the instrument, she decided she needed more shopping therapy. Her meeting at the second university had been moved up to this afternoon, and she needed to be there by 2, which gave her 2 hours to spend more money. Wandering around the large mall, she had managed to make a couple purchases, but each time she looked at an item, she couldn't help wondering what Jake would think of it. She realized after she'd bought it that the lingerie she'd purchased the day before had been more to see the delight on his face than for her. She had fantasized about what it would feel like to have him remove the beautiful silk pieces from her body. Would he be careful? Or would he rip them off in his eager attempt to ravish her? Shaking her head at the direction of her thoughts, she sat down on a bench to listen to some music. The pianist was situated in a rotunda surrounded by windows, bringing the outside in,
With a sigh, she texted the driver that she was ready to be picked up, and she made her way out to the waiting car. As they pulled away from the mall, Il Signor Bresi called. "Alexandra, how are you? Are your meetings going well?" "See, I have my second meeting this afternoon. How are you? Have your meetings in Toronto been productive?" "They were more than productive. I am very happy to say that things are once again, as the Americans say, looking up for me." She could hear the relief in his voice, and she was overjoyed to hear his good news. "That is splendido, Il Signor Bresi. Indeed, such good news." At least one of them was happy. See. I wanted to let you know that I will be in Denver later this week to sign some contracts, and I wish you to dine with myself and the Caldwells." Alex froze. With Trent Caldwell? Is he not the man who is— "Not anymore. We have come to an agreement between us, as we should have long ago. There was so much anger and grief between us that we did not know how to bridge the divide until Trent's wife Brianna intervened. She is both wise and lovely and made an old foolish man and a young hothead sit down and talk. We have found that there are sparks of a friendship, and we both were about to ruin ourselves over petty desires for revenge. You could help. You and your music. Speaking of, I must thank you for the songs you sent to me. They helped to heal my heart." She bit her lower lip. "But I thought, Jake Travers, he was working for this man, this Caldwell." See, but do not worry so. I will speak with him. We will find out if it was only work." Alex shook her head. She didn't want to talk about Jake Travers or even think of him. She forced a smile into her voice and agreed to have dinner with him when he arrived. Then she headed back to her hotel to get ready for her appointment. The meeting went well, and she found that she liked the environment better at this school than at the other university. The deans of both the music and education departments had read through all of her research prior to her arrival and had made several interesting suggestions about possible directions for her research to take that gave her much to think about. They'd invited her to dinner to continue their discussion. It was a children's day at the university, and Alex was glad they had suggested she bring her cello. They settled her in a chair on the lawn outside, under the dappled shade of a tall pine tree. 6 children, all with development issues, sat around her. She knew 2 to be autistic, but the music would reach them. It always did. 2 others looked to have birth defects that hindered them physically, but she saw bright eyes on both of them. The other 2 looked like trouble, like Jake. She tried not to think of him, but every man made her turn her head, looking for his broad shoulders and his lean, muscular form. Even that man walking with the baby in his arms looked like— oh no, it was him. With a baby? She started to get up, but the director asked her what was wrong and the children stared at her, one small girl with a quivering lower lip. She couldn't abandon them. Sitting down again, she held the cello nestled between her knees, the bow poised, and started to play. She would lose herself in her music. But she didn't. She was too aware of Jake standing nearby, of the baby in his arms who gurgled at the music and reached her hand out as if she could grasp the musical notes from the air. She played something bright, letting her sorrow lift away to be replaced by hope, the hope these children needed. She ended and looked up. One boy clapped, another drooled, and a small one toddled over to touch the cello strings. Alex stood and faced Jake. He came to her and faced the baby to her. "Faith Caldwell, this is Alex. Alex, this is the baby Mario Bresi tried to steal." Chapter 20. Jake knew it was a long shot, but he had to take it.
Alex sucked in a hard breath, and Jake told the story, fast and short, how baby Faith was taken from the hospital only hours after being born and delivered to Bresi, who had viewed taking Trent's child as compensation for the death of Serena and her baby. That's why I was hired to keep tabs on Bresi, and then you showed up, and I couldn't put the job first. I couldn't stay away from you. She frowned and looked like she might be getting ready to argue with him, but Sean was walking toward them along with Seth and Chelsea, and that shut her up. Alex, you've met Sean. This is his business partner, Seth, and Seth's girlfriend, Chelsea. She was the nurse that Bresi hired to take care of Faith. Alex opened and closed her mouth, looking as if she was searching for the words to refute what he'd said. She certainly didn't look like she believed him. Before he could say more, Chelsea chimed in. It's true. And trust me, when I first found out about it, I didn't believe it either. Marco was so kind to me when I arrived at the cabin, and he seemed so sad. Chelsea elbowed Seth. And then this guy shows up telling me a different story, and suddenly we're on the run? People are getting shot, and... Wait! Alex held up her hand and Chelsea paused. Who was shot? By El Señor Bresi? Seth raised his hand in front of his chest. Me. And not by Marco, by that woman. Mrs. Panturo, Chelsea finished. Alex scoffed and shook her head, leaving Jake worried that their help was making things worse. Mrs. Panturo? She shook her head again. The woman is difficult to like, but I cannot imagine her shooting anyone. Seth and Chelsea nodded their heads in unison. She did, Seth affirmed, lifting the front of his shirt to show the bright scar, which was barely 2 months old. But then Chelsea shot her. In the foot! Chelsea practically hissed at him and elbowed him again. The two began to squabble like an old married couple, and Jake was now certain that he had now destroyed any hope of getting her to listen to him. Suddenly, Alex began to chuckle as she looked at Chelsea. I must admit, there are times I think... At that moment, Sean stepped forward to take the baby from Jake. You done borrowing the kid? Because if I don't get her back to the house before Trent and Brianna get home, Trent will skin me and then Bree will take her turn. He looked at Alex. Please, put this guy out of his misery and forgive him for being a jerk. I knew he was a goner the second I saw him look at you, but it's always taken Pretty Boy a little more time to figure these things out. Jake slapped Sean's arm, careful not to jostle Faith, who was starting to fret. Go. Tell Caldwell he still owes me for a full week's work. Sean gave a half wave and the three turned to leave. Chelsea smiled at Alex. I hope to see you again. You play wonderfully. With a skip, she ran across the grass to catch up with Sean and Seth, who wrapped his arm around her waist. Jake turned to Alex, who started putting her cello away. She still hadn't said anything else, and Jake wondered if she was ignoring him. Alex? Placing her bow in the case, she closed the lid and stood back up. What is it that you do, exactly? Mostly PI work, private investigations. Means following a lot of folks, surveillance, industrial stuff, helping companies figure out if they have a leak and stopping it. Less dangerous than the military. She lifted her chin. So, you are poor. Nope, sorry, other way around. I charge top dollar because I'm that good. Most of the work comes from referrals. It's gone so well that I'm turning down work these days. What else do you want to know? Was I just a way to get to Il Signor Bresi? Yes and no. Bresi was the job, not you. You are a breath of fresh air. You're my heartbeat, Alex. And you can walk away right now, but I'll just find some other way to get in front of you, and I'll keep doing it. Alex, what we have is special. Sean's right. I was a goner from the second I first saw you. Took me a few hours to realize it. She gave a snort. So, love at first sight? He took her hand. More like first touch. Sweetheart, don't take your music from me. I found you, and I don't think I can let you go. He followed her. She dined with 2 women that he was able to figure out were from the university. Jake sat outside, his coat pulled tight as the temperature dropped. When the meal was over, the three were all smiles. Before she left, Alex had shaken both of their hands, which Jake had hoped to mean that she was considering a position with their school. He could work with that. Around 10, Alex took a cab back to her hotel. Jake gave up waiting outside and headed into the bar. Alex was there, sitting at the bar, a glass of red wine in front of her. The seat next to her had a beer, so Jake sat there. "Meeting someone?" She turned and smiled at him. "You. The bartender said you might like that." She nodded to the beer. Jake took a long pull on it, a local he'd bet, and not half bad. "This mean we're good?" She tipped her head to one side. "This means I'm thinking about it." She finished her wine. "You want to come upstairs with me?" He didn't wait to be asked again. She kept her distance in the elevator, walked in front of him to her hotel room, and he was sure the sway of her hips was to torment him. She unlocked her door, let him step past her, then she closed the door and pinned him to the wall. "Now we will see what happens when there are no lies between us." She put her mouth on his and pressed her body against his. Clothes started flying. He was panting hard, and how did he get this dress off her? "How does this come off?" he asked, using his hands to try and discover a zipper or buttons. She reached up and untied something behind her neck. The entire dress dropped, leaving her in nothing but black lace lingerie. Jake looked up. "That's a good look on you." She pushed on his chest, walking him backward until he sat down on the bed. He'd worn a button-down shirt. She ripped it open. Buttons went flying. She pushed him down on the bed and straddled him. "Kiss me." "Pleasure, ma'am. Any place in particular?" It all happened so fast, and only once they were finished did he realize that he'd forgotten a condom. So had she. Reaching up, he pulled her down to kiss her. "Okay, make-up sex makes up for everything. Want to throw me out again?" Her mouth twisted. She put a hand on his chest. "Well, I was going to start with proposing marriage. I am not letting you get away. But this is America, and you need some time to settle. I figure we move in, fight a lot, make up with great sex. Then when a kid's on the way, we'll fly your dad over to tell him and have a big wedding. Say, in a year or two?" She snuggled up against him. "We fly to Italy, bigger wedding there, and you will have to meet Papa sooner than that." He pulled her closer to him. "I can work with that." Epilogue. Christmas. "Did you buy out the whole store?" Jake teased as Alex helped him load brightly colored gift bags filled with Christmas presents into his new car. A classic Alfa Romeo she adored, but that he never drove fast enough as the car deserved. Giving him a mock glare, she checked to make sure everything was accounted for before going back into the house to put on her shoes and grab her coat. "This is my first Christmas in America, and we're celebrating with your friends. I want everything to be perfect." Coming up behind her, Jake wrapped his arm around her waist and pulled her into his chest where she melted against him. Kissing that spot on her neck that gave her goosebumps, he gave her a small nip. "They already love you. You certainly don't need to ply them all with presents." Turning in his arms, she kissed him. "I'm not trying to ply them with anything, but I don't want to leave anyone out." Before she could pull away, Jake pulled her tighter against him and intensified the kiss. He whispered against her lips, "How about we take this back to the bedroom, and I text Sean that something came up." Laughing, she managed to push away from him. "We're already late, and I really want to go." She tilted her head and blinked her eyes at him. "Please?" He groaned and stepped back. "Fine, but it's your fault if I can't think coherently." Laughing, she agreed and stepped into her ankle boots before pulling up the zippers. "Well, if you behave, perhaps you can have an early Christmas present tonight," she teased. Grabbing her around the waist, he twirled her around in a circle. "Every moment with you, my love, is a present." Reaching for her coat, he helped her put it on and gave her another kiss before escorting her back. As Jake drove them out to the Caldwells, Alex became lost in thought. So much had happened since she first set foot on American soil, and Alex was still a bit in awe over it all. Her new position with the university didn't start until January, and she was excited at the prospect of teaching 2 classes. excited and a bit terrified. Well, a lot terrified. But the music department had been very welcoming, and she was back to work on her research with plans to pursue her doctorate. Her relationship with Jake had been a whirlwind, but after spending time with Chelsea Andrews and her sister Rachel Swanson, she'd found out that it had been the same for them, leaving Alex to wonder if there was something in the water, or perhaps there was just something about the men of MJI. Unfortunately, her papa had been less than thrilled that his daughter was in love with an American. But after speaking with Il Signor Bresi, he had calmed down and looked forward to meeting Jake when they went to Italy in February. Alex was excited to show Jake Verona and attend the Verona in Love Festival, which was a highlight every year. She shifted out of her thoughts when Jake took her hand and gave it a squeeze. "Penny for your thoughts?" Alex tilted her head and smiled. She'd grown to love that English idiom. "Alex." Turning to angle toward him as he drove, she said, "I was just thinking about how much has happened since I first landed in New York. I'm so happy, but it all still seems so fast." Lifting her hand, Jake pressed a kiss to the back. "Do you have any regrets?" Alex was quick to shake her head. "No, none. I love Denver, and I'm excited for my new job." Jake tightened his grip on her hand, and she bit back a grin and tried to keep her amusement out of her voice. "Your friends are all so lovely and welcoming, despite everything that's happened. Which is why I really wanted to go to the Caldwell's Christmas party, to show them how appreciative I am of their friendship." Jake pulled up outside the Caldwell home, and Alex took note of all the cars already out front. Biting her lip, she attempted to sound concerned. "It looks like we are definitely fashionably late." Parking the car, he turned off the engine, took off his seatbelt, gasping as he tightened his hand on her. "Well, I do like that thing you do with your mouth." Alex yelped as his grip got tighter. "And then there's that thing with your hand and—" They both jumped when there was a loud knock on the passenger window. "Hey, you two! Either get a room or save it for later and come inside," Trent barked out. He bent down to stare at them, and they both saw that he was wearing a Santa hat and glaring. "Is it just me, or does Trent look more like the Grinch than Santa?" Jake asked, making them both laugh. "Definitely Grinch-like." Waving at Trent, she called out, "We're coming!" before she scooted back over to the passenger side. As Trent opened the door to help her out, Jake joined her at the back of the car, and together the three of them carried in all the presents, with Trent complaining the whole way. "Is this your normal mood at Christmas, or did something happen to set you off?" Jake questioned as Trent led the way into the house. "Brianna and her mother went overboard with the decorations. I feel like I'm being held prisoner in some holiday horror movie," Trent grumbled. They walked inside to a sea of Christmas mayhem. Every surface was decorated. Lights, animation, sound, and smells assaulted the senses. Alex was positively delighted. "Why, it's wonderful," Alex crooned as she turned in a circle, taking it all in. "See? I told you it was nice," Brianna said, walking over to join them. She gave Alex a hug. "Ignore Grinch Caldwell over there. He's been griping about the extravagance for days now. You'd think he'd rather live in a cave." "Seriously? A dog and a cave, is that too much for a man to ask for?" Trent geared his question toward Jake, and the two shared a fist bump, making Alex laugh and shake her head. "Bree, where would you like me to place the presents?" she asked. "This way. Let's leave the grumps." Alex left Jake behind with Trent and followed Bree out to the family room, where she saw a train making its way around the room, and Rachel's twin toddlers, David and Tony, attempting to follow along behind it. The boys turned as she walked into the room, and Alex laughed when she saw their matching Christmas sweaters. Alex blushed at the compliment, even though she didn't agree. She'd chosen a festive gold-colored sweater with silver threads woven through it and matching palazzo pants. She'd wanted to be comfortable but still appropriate. She had seen Christmas sweaters in many stores but had thought them too ugly to wear. Seeing Rachel with the twins, she could now understand the appeal. Tristram and Maria, the receptionist at MJI, were also dressed in matching holiday attire that looked more suitable for the Day of the Dead with the sugar skulls, and their new baby, little Eva, was festively dressed as an elf, as was baby Faith. Everyone else had some sort of holiday attire. When Jake came in from outside with the guys, he was wearing a Santa hat. Sean's wife, Janet, brought her out a glass of wine and gave her a choice between reindeer antlers or an elf hat. After trying both on, Alex had opted for the antlers, resulting in much delight from everyone else and a few naughty comments whispered in her ear from Jake. Dinner turned into a grand, boisterous affair, with everyone having a good time. Alex felt as though she'd known everyone there for all her life instead of only a few weeks. After dinner, toasts were made and Brianna offered up her thanks to Il Signor Bresi, which made Trent grind his teeth, though he remained silent. As Alex had come to learn, despite all the difficulties the man had caused, he'd brought good things into these people's lives as well, even if it had been inadvertent. If it wasn't for him, Seth and Chelsea and Chance and Rachel might have never met. In fact, the same could be said for her and Jake. Raising her glass, she joined in with a "Alla nostra salute!" as everyone shouted, "Chin chin!" After dinner, when everyone settled back in the family room to open their gifts, Sean and Janet said they had something to share. As the room quieted, Sean stood and gestured to his wife. As most of you know, Janet and I have been trying for a baby, but it has taken more time than we had hoped. Sean was interrupted with shouts and comments from the others questioning his manhood and suggestions of how practice makes perfect. Sean took it in stride for a minute, but he finally held up his hand for quiet. "Are you finished?" "Well, good." Alex smiled at him and lifted one shoulder. "There is time for everything, is there not?" He took her hand. "Anything for you, princess. Absolutely anything."